Today Washington finds itself in a high-stakes political standoff as the federal government remains partially closed and Republican leaders lean into an ambitious agenda that critics say could reshape the federal workforce and the administrative state. Republican lawmakers have refused to pass a full funding bill, turning a routine appropriations fight into a vehicle for sweeping policy demands. The White House and House GOP remain publicly at odds, and the shutdown, now in its second day, has already started to slow services and pause discretionary projects tied to federal contracts. At the center of the controversy is a conservative blueprint known as Project 2025, a plan that advocates for deep reorganization across federal agencies and substantial staff reductions. President Trump has signaled he will use the shutdown as an opportunity to accelerate these changes, meeting with transition planners and personnel known for large-scale restructuring. Supporters frame the effort as a necessary pruning of federal bureaucracy and a return of power to states and private enterprise. Opponents warn of long-term damage to regulatory capacity, public services, and national preparedness. The political math in Congress remains fraught. Some House Republicans argue that hard-line demands are necessary to secure conservative priorities. Others fear the public will blame their party for any tangible harms. Meanwhile, the Senate and Democratic leaders are calling for a clean funding bill to reopen the government, warning that continued closure will erode public confidence and disrupt services, particularly for low-income communities that rely on federally funded programs. Analysts warn the shutdown's economic costs are likely to mount if it stretches weeks, potentially hampering small contractors and state projects. Beyond immediate disruption, legal scholars say this confrontation tests the balance between presidential priorities and institutional continuity. Some federal career officials have reportedly begun contingency planning. Financial markets so far have absorbed the political noise, but analysts caution that an extended shutdown paired with other policy shocks could increase economic volatility, especially if it coincides with moves that alter regulatory certainty across healthcare, trade, or energy sectors. For viewers, watch for daily signals, whether House leadership relents, whether a stopgap reaches the president's desk, and whether any bipartisan compromise emerges to reopen the government. The outcome will influence campaign narratives, federal operations, and possibly the short-term economic outlook. The Middle East dominated headlines today after a U.S.-backed plan to end the nearly two-year war in Gaza prompted intense diplomatic movement and immediate on-the-ground turmoil. President Trump publicly floated a ceasefire and reconstruction framework aimed at securing the release of hostages and guaranteeing humanitarian corridors. Hamas officials have reportedly indicated they will respond, with amendments, in the coming hours. The announcement has triggered urgent shuttle diplomacy among regional actors, including Egypt and Qatar, who are seeking to shape any final terms. At sea, an international aid flotilla bound for Gaza was intercepted in a dramatic operation that ignited global protests. Organizers said most vessels were boarded, with hundreds of activists detained, a move that drew condemnation from multiple capitals and amplified pressure on Washington to clarify its position. Israel defended the intercepts on security grounds, calling the area an active combat zone. Critics argue the blockade and the interdiction of life-saving supplies will further inflame international opinion and complicate diplomatic pathways. Humanitarian agencies report that Gaza remains in crisis, with large-scale displacement and urgent needs for food, water, and medical supplies. Even with high-level proposals on the table, operational delivery of aid has been patchy and dangerous, and the flotilla episode underscores the logistical and legal hurdles to sustained relief inside a conflict zone. Regional analysts warn that any peace plan will succeed only if coupled with enforceable aid corridors, credible reconstruction guarantees, and mechanisms to protect civilians, not merely headline agreements. U.S. policymakers face a complicated choice: press for a fast diplomatic breakthrough that could bring short-term calm, or demand more robust guarantees and verification steps that take longer to negotiate. The political dimension inside the U.S. is immediate. The White House's plan is being framed by both critics and supporters as a major foreign policy gambit, one that could define American engagement in the region for years. For now, the world watches whether ceasefire negotiations and humanitarian access can move from proposals to durable reality. Wall Street closed with mixed but resilient headlines today. Major indexes set new closing records even as global markets weighed a weakening U.S. dollar and shifting policy signals. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq reached fresh highs, with technology names leading gains while some domestically focused sectors lagged. Analysts say the market's bifurcation reflects investor preference for multinational firms that benefit from a softer dollar and growing international demand. Underlying this market backdrop is a notable slide in the U.S. dollar, down nearly 10% versus major currencies this year according to reports, which is reshaping corporate winners and losers. Exporters and global tech giants have seen revenue boosts from currency translation, while import-heavy and consumer-focused firms face margin pressures from higher import costs. Portfolio managers are increasingly hedging currency exposure and reallocating toward multinational heavy indices. This dynamic could persist into earnings season, where overseas revenue share will determine relative performance. Policy moves are adding another layer of complexity. The administration signaled it will delay certain Medicare rule fixes meant to tighten drug price negotiation loopholes, a move that drew criticism from consumer advocates and could affect healthcare sector valuations. Meanwhile, investors are parsing the political noise from the shutdown and potential regulatory changes tied to Project 2025. Uncertainty around healthcare, trade, and regulatory rollbacks tends to increase short-term volatility even when headline indexes climb. For business leaders and ordinary investors, the message is to watch earnings details for foreign revenue contribution, monitor guidance around input costs linked to the dollar, and track Washington for policy announcements that could materially alter industry outlooks. Markets can absorb political drama in the short run, but persistent policy shifts or prolonged government disruption would pose heavier macro risks.